All right, welcome to our new show, Mental Performance for Coaches, in which we'll talk about topics related to mental performance and how we can be better as coaches and help our athletes on the mental side of the game. We brought in some heavy hitters as co-hosts for this project, so let's start by introducing yourselves.
Yeah, thanks, Billy. I'm excited to be here. My name is Bernie Holliday. I'm rolling into my 15th season with the Pittsburgh Pirates full time. First 13 of those was really focused on overseeing and leading our mental performance efforts with the Pirates, helping our coaches and players really optimize their mental game. And the last couple of years, I've shifted more to a learning focus and working really exclusively with our scouts to help our scouts really understand the head and the heart of players that they might be bringing into the organization. So pumped to be here and excited to learn from all of you.
Hey, my name is Ceci Kraft. I think you'll find a trend. We seem to be in baseball. I've been with the Phillies for the last 3 years. I guess I'm starting my third year with them now as the director of mental performance. Before that, my background's mostly working with Special Forces soldiers on Fort Bragg in North Carolina, getting out into the woods and understanding what they need to perform at their highest levels. And then with the Cleveland Indians for 6 seasons, working at their major league level, coaching alongside their coaches, supporting coaches, major league players, similar to Bernie, some stuff with the amateur draft and figuring out what does great makeup mentality, mental performance look like.
Sure, I should be the three-hole hitter with this group, but I'm very honored and humbled to follow Bernie and Cece in this and be part of this project. So my name's Zach Brandon. I currently serve as the head of mental performance and coach development for the Arizona Diamondbacks. This is will be my sixth season with the organization, and I spent the past 5 years primarily focused on developing, leading, and the implementation of our mental performance program and kind of across major league to the minor league levels. And then this year that role has kind of expanded a little bit more formally to be a more direct support for our coaches and supporting them as performers in their own right. So really excited about this project. And then prior to this role, spent a couple years at IMG Academy in Florida, working as a mental conditioning coach with a range of different sports, wonderful ground to wonderful lab, I'll call it, to fail and to grow as a young practitioner. So very excited to be part of this project and learn from you all.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to get going. And I mean, the best minds are in baseball, apparently, because we got you guys all here. But obviously, especially mental performance, I think translates to every sport a little more than if we're talking practice design. So let's get into it. Bernie, what's our first topic? You want to lead us in?
Absolutely. I know the work that you guys have done on the podcast with the motor learning side, and that there are certain camps that can be kind of entrenched in their views within various aspects of mental performance, and at times can even go at odds with one another. And I thought we might grab a topic that's very similar within the mental performance space, looking at self-talk and what positive self-talk is all about. And is positive self-talk important? Is it necessary? Can it even be hurtful or harmful to our performance? So positive self-talk is oftentimes a very polarizing topic. Some people love it. Other people think it's absolutely unnecessary. And I thought I'd share with you for about 5 minutes sort of my own career journey into what I would call my sort of professional midlife crisis, where I started to question everything that I was taught. But if you think about this idea of positive self-talk, whenever I would work with a new team or work with a new athlete, oftentimes I would ask, hey, what do you want to focus on? And inevitably, a large majority of those responses come back. You know what? My self talk is terrible. I'm very negative with myself. I wish I could be more positive with my self talk. And I hear that time and time and time again. So I thought it would be a fun place for us to start as a foursome here to kind of go into the self talk place and to kind of give you sort of a feel for these differing camps of self talk and how we look at sort of our inner dialogue. There's a camp called cognitive behavioral group or cognitive behavioral theory, which basically states that your thoughts are what drives the train. What we say to ourselves impact how we feel, which impacts our physiology, which impacts ultimately our performance. And if you want to get a better performance, you need to have better thinking. You need to have better self-talk. And that's really kind of the camp that I was entrenched in for the first 10 years of my career. It was all about managing your inner experience, managing your thoughts, managing your emotions, managing that inner voice and that self-talk that we have. And I could even say micromanaging that inner experience. trying to control and command it to where you want it to be so that you can have better performances. A great story that I can share that I think will kind of highlight how this works. There was a self-help author, self-help researcher that had the interview a guy named Dr. James Gills, who was a double Ironman competitor. And basically, if you think about Ironman, it's like a 2.4 mile open ocean swim. You got a 112-mile bike ride after that, and then you run 26 miles. And for these double Ironmans, you do it back to back. And this author researcher asked Dr. Gills, how in the world could you do such a monumental human feat to do two of these back to back? And he said, well, over the years of doing this, I've done 6 of these, and I've learned it's really important that you need to talk to yourself rather than listen to yourself. And he said, if you end up listening to yourself, you hear all the doubts, all the insecurities, all the second guesses, all the why nots. Why can't I finish this? Why am I going to fail? But if you learn to talk to yourself, you can feed yourself with the motivation, the drive, the persistence, and the fortitude to finish the race. So I've learned to talk to myself rather than listen to myself. And I think that's a really clear way of kind of highlighting what this cognitive behavioral approach is, this command and control approach to how we manage ourselves and manage that inner voice, that self-talk. And for a long time, that's where I was. Around 2010, my first year with the Pirates, I'm working with a player, one of our big leaguers, most wonderful human being on the planet, big time hugger, hugs everybody in the clubhouse every day, and just a sweet, empathetic, caring human being, one of my favorite human beings ever. And he was having a rough time and having a rough year. We were working through some things, and I was bringing this cognitive behavioral approach, trying to help him become more positive with the self-talk, try to suppress his negative emotions, try to shut down his negative thinking, and become more effective in how he uses that inner voice. And I could see it not working, and I could see it frustrating him, and I could see us not getting anywhere, and I couldn't figure out why. It was a big time failure in my own career, trying to really kind of impose this cognitive behavioral approach on this athlete. Basically, here's a guy that just wants to get along with himself and be at peace with himself. And I'm telling him to go to World War III with his thoughts and his emotions, and to fight himself and to beat down his inner experience. And he just wants to get along, man. He just wants to hug himself and kind of figure out how to be at peace with his inner voice and with his inner emotions. And I started to realize maybe this cognitive behavioral thing isn't the only way. And maybe it actually gets in the way of some people. And it kind of spun me for a loop, in that year. Shortly after that, probably a year or two later, I got an email from Tom Black, and I think you Billy know Tom Black, and he's part of your coaching tree in volleyball at the University of Georgia now. And Tom Black emails me and says, Bernie, do you think positive self-talk matters? And I'm like, yes, ... and I don't know. And then Tom went into reasons why and explained to me, why he's kind of moved away from this idea of positive self-talk. And again, it got me spinning. It got me thinking about, are there other ways of thinking about this? Are there other ways of kind of making sense of this sort of inner experience that we all have as athletes and as coaches? And that's when I kind of came across this alternative camp, the second camp. This camp has kind of shaped my second 10 years of my career. They call it sort of the acceptance commitment camp, and how we, rather than trying to command and control our inner voice and our self-talk, we can learn to bring more acceptance to those inner dialogues, those inner feelings. And while we learn to accept them, we can then commit our focus back to the things that matter most, what we value and what we want to accomplish, our goals and our values. And it's really a different way of looking at what do we do with that inner self-talk. Rather than trying to change the self-talk, it's more about changing our relationship to the self-talk, changing our relationship to that inner experience rather than trying to micromanage the inner experience. And it started to resonate with me a lot more than I ever thought it would. The idea behind it is that, our thoughts and our emotions are changing every single moment of our lives. And if we're making our choices based on these ever-changing thoughts and emotions, we're going to be all over the place with the choices and behaviors that we take on. So why in the world would we let our thoughts and emotions influence our behavior that much when they're always changing, they're always spontaneous, oftentimes they're often irrational, and sometimes just nonsense thoughts and feelings. And yet we take them so serious and take ourselves so serious sometimes as athletes, as performers, and as coaches. Maybe we're giving those things too much power. And as I heard that, and I started to think back to some of the failures I've had with athletes when I've tried to sort of, impose this concept of let's manage our self-talk, let's make it from negative to positive. Let's manage our emotions by being more positive with our thoughts. We can create more positive emotions. I started to realize that, maybe we have been giving our self-talk and our inner experience too much power over us. And if we can learn to accept it for what it is, it's an ever-changing voice and an ever-changing feeling that's often very irrational and not true to begin with, then let's start to redirect our attention and energy elsewhere. I'll give you one story here that kind of will close this process out, and we'll open it up to the group here to get their thoughts on kind of where they sit with this. But Michaela Schifrin has been the most dominant skier on the planet, downhill skier on the planet for the last 10 plus years. And right at the peak of her skiing dominance, she gave this interview, which I thought was beautiful. She was being asked, what's it like when you're getting ready to step into the gate and race down the hill? And she goes, well, I get in there and there's about 30 seconds before the race. And suddenly, that self-talk kicks in, and I've got this angel and this devil on my shoulders. And one of them saying, hey, it looks icy, it looks steep, you're going to die, you're going to get injured, you're going to get hurt. And the angel on my shoulder saying, hey, man, don't worry. You do this every day. This is what you do for a living. You're going to be fine. And then the devil says, no, it looks really steep. It looks really icy. You're going to get hurt. You're going to die. And the angel says, no. You do this all the time. And the interviewer looked confused and said, you really have those conflicting thoughts just minutes before a race? And she goes, no, seconds before a race. Yeah. And then very matter of factly, she goes, oh, yeah. And then she smiles and looks a little bit frustrated at the same time. And she goes, there are people that believe you can't have any fear when racing downhill. And I call BS. That I think fear is healthy. And I think fear is a very natural emotion that we need to perform our best, especially in downhill. And when I shared that interview with our players and our coaches, I asked them after they watch it, not what did you think, but how did that make you feel? And the first answer that they typically give me is, I feel relieved. I thought I was the only one. I thought I had the devil on my shoulder whispering to me that I'm going to fail, that I wasn't ready, that I'm inadequate, that I'm not prepared, that this is not going to go well. And to hear the best in the world that she wrestles with that every single time she races, I feel relieved to know that. And it was a really powerful moment for me to hear that was the experience that my athletes and coaches were hearing when they heard Michaela Schifrin talk about what she does with that inner voice and her own challenges. And it made me realize that, maybe there is something to recognizing and normalizing that we can have negative thoughts. We do have negative thoughts. They lead to worrisome emotions, and that we win gold medals all the time, feeling these feelings and having these thoughts. And that's kind of the journey that I went on. That's been sort of my evolution, kind of moving away from pure cognitive behavioral coaching into more of this blended opportunity. And I guess where I'm at now is, how do I marry them? How do I marry the two together? Can they be married, or are they oil and water? Are they that separate that you can't marry them? And I think, going back to the motor learning piece that you guys do on the podcast every so often, I think that's the same question that they wrestle with on motor learning is, can you marry these sort of conflicting camps that are often at odds with each other? And that's, I think, how these two self-talk camps can be at times. So now I'll shut up and let you guys share some thoughts here on my battling for the last 10 minutes.
That was great, Bernie. And it wouldn't be a Coach Your Brains Out episode without warring camps, talking about two different topics. I'd love to hear from you guys, kind of where you are as far as, I guess, the managing thoughts versus acceptance commitment. And, but I know just Bernie telling that story, I felt relief hearing Michaela Schifrin and what, how she smiles at fear and stuff like that. So hopefully that's a lesson that our coaches can share with their players. But Ceci, can you start us off? When a athlete comes up to you to talk about self-talk, kind of where are you at with this?
I love Bernie's points, and I think my crucible moment probably happened working with soldiers, in that there's a lot that happens in and around soldiers that there's not a positive thought around, and there shouldn't be. If you're responding to a medical emergency, a guy on your team that's been shot, I don't need you to have a positive thought. I need you to have an effective thought. You need to do something, and it's not gonna be positive. And I think it would be pretty horrific to tell someone to try to be positive in that moment. So I think a lot of, for me, where the academics and the theory I was taught shifted into, okay, when the rubber has to meet the road, what's actually going to work here, was trying to transfer it over into military populations and realizing that a lot of the theory was really beautiful, but it really didn't play when the stakes were that high, and trying to figure out what played and what didn't. I do think it's worth kind of putting parameters on stuff, right? I mean, I think, with young novices, we know there's more positive feedback needed. And so trying to build in as you're stepping into a void for the first time, maybe more grace for yourself, or hunting the good stuff, or components like that. Like, I actually think that can have a time and a place. I very much agree with Bernie, though, like trying to control your thoughts, like gripping them that tight and thinking you should only think good things, I just don't think is real. And I think as you move up, Bernie's talking about major league examples, or experienced or elite performers. I think oftentimes you find that the mindset they need to have, the self-talk they need to have, is going to be very fitting to who they are. A lot of those guys are phenomenal at what they do because they're really hard on themselves. And they're not going to be positive. They're going to be really hard on themselves. So to me, it's about being performance effective and figuring out what's the thought pattern, what's the self-talk, what actually fits who you are, and how you perform and how you get through moments. I'm laughing a little bit. ACT has some components to me, probably even culturally within the academic world, that repel me, but I find myself very drawn to the concept of commitment, or excuse me, of acceptance. And I think it's the piece we don't talk enough of. I don't know if I can say this on here, but shit happened, or something happened. Now what? Like, and can you deal with the fact that something happened, and can you accept that something happened? And I think in performance, that's one of the biggest pieces. So you're having negative thoughts. Okay. Someone just hit a home run. Okay. You're losing terribly. Okay. Now what? And I think the now what involving your thinking, your problem solving, your process, to me, is what gets it exciting. I think the last thing I'd say is there's some really cool research from the Great British Medalist Research Project out of the UK. And they found, actually, like with a lot of athletes that were gold medalists, or people that were winning consistently, you know, they come from some really interesting backgrounds. They sometimes have some really unhealthy attachments to sport. It's not necessarily the happiest story you're ever going to hear. And I think that's like also the dirty secret of high performance is my field loves to say that we're building like healthier, happier, hardy people. And I would tell you, I'm helping build really high performing people. But by nature, they're outlierish, and they're dysfunctional in a high functioning way. That doesn't always end up being well-rounded, and the thought patterns follow that. So not a huge fan of positive self-talk, a fan of effective self-talk.
That's a cool distinction. And yeah, and I think what you said about, especially working with armed forces, but even like sports, like if you get, like you said, you strike out, or a hitter gets blocked, it's kind of unrealistic to be overly positive in those situations. Some false optimism. So that's cool. Zach, where are you at with all this?
Between those two, this is gonna be a tough one. I will say this, like one thing I've heard Bernie reference a lot is like defying comfort zones. And when I first heard that this was going to be the first session that we were going to start with, I was like, what a fitting example of, for me, having to go outside my comfort zone, because I kind of cringed at first having to talk about positive self-talk, because those two camps that he described, for most of my kind of, I think, professional career, I've been in camp two. That's the camp that's resonated more for me from a personal standpoint. It's felt more aligned with some of the players and the conversations that I've had with them, of recognizing that I think our inner voice is this storyteller that's constantly creating these narratives around the events in our lives, right? And I think that's one way in terms of which I think I've framed a lot of things that it's been helpful for players, is there's the event and then there's the story of the event, and understanding how to differentiate the two, and what's factual and what's true, and what's the actual evidence at mind. Because I think some have a lot of thoughts that if you decode them and you unpack them, they actually lack evidence for that. Those things that you're thinking about yourself aren't truly true. And I think I've always resonated with the ACT kind of camp two approach, in that it's not about changing the content, but more so, as Bernie eloquently said, it's changing your relationship to the content. So that's one thing that comes to mind for me. I think Ceci said it really well too, where effective self-talk isn't always positive, and positive self-talk isn't always effective either. And so I say all that, but I think I've started to have my mid-professional career shift in that I have a lot of players that I know resonate with the positive kind of thinking perspective in Camp One, and realizing to try to help guide them. For some, those are it's a different approach and it's a different style, and I've tried to kind of open up my own kind of approach and philosophy around that a little bit more to meet people where they're at. The thing I'll say with it, I have zero musical talents or skills, but I find that I really like to kind of connect our thoughts to music, right? So like those, your self-talk is that inner soundtrack for your self-image, for your mindset, and understanding that just like on everybody's phone has so much variety, so much, like we could probably put all four of our playlists down on a table, you know, and line them up, and each person has different types of music, different styles, genres that resonate for you. I think in the same light for players, like there's different thought patterns, there's different mantras, affirmations, ways of thinking, statements that each resonate with each individual. And so one thing that I've been thinking more and more about is, you know, like you go to the gym, you might have a playlist that you've already set created. And I don't know about others. Sometimes I go to the gym and I end up spending more time on my phone hitting next on the song because I'm like, this doesn't really fit right now. I don't really love this. Doesn't fit the vibe. Whereas what you sometimes do, and I think like runners and some endurance athletes will do this at times, where they'll kind of preset the playlist. Hey, these are the songs that I want to listen to. I think you can almost apply a similar thought process to our thoughts in competition, that rather than just leave your thoughts to chance in the heat of the moment, can you almost pre-organize what soundtracks you want to listen to in the game? What are going to be those things that you want to have? And that is a little bit more of a CBT kind of approach, but something that talking to players a little bit more is like, what's the playlist that you want to listen to in competition? What do you want those things to say? And again, whether or not it's positive or not, it's figuring out what makes it helpful for somebody. And so I'm trying to be open and expand kind of that perspective, because I'm finding that does resonate with some. And so I really appreciate what Bernie said, is at a point in our career where it's how do you blend the two and what's that marriage look like?
Can I come off Zach real quick? Because I think he brings a great point. I think another piece that caused a crucible in my career is there's the way you do stuff when you have time, and there's the way you're going to do stuff under pressure. And one of the things that I think Zach brings up is within our field, there's, you know, humanistic approaches, like much more go with what you feel, or notice how you're feeling, and pay attention to whether or not that's accurate, and question your thoughts, or let the emotion pass. And emotions don't last longer than 5 to 7 minutes. Under pressure, you don't have 5 to 7 minutes to resolve out of an emotion. And so I think that's another place for me in the career where I've said, okay, where do we possibly need to have stuff better built in? If this happens, then we're going to go here mentally, versus in your everyday life, this is a great practice to have. And I think one of the things that I've loved is actually building in, and Zach, you hit on this, what's the story we keep telling ourselves? What are our common narratives? And I think as humans, we have explanatory styles or narratives that we constantly tell ourselves, and some of them, again, are effective and some of them are not. And so are the narratives you're building into games helping you in good moments, helping you in bad moments, helping you in the everyday? And I think if you kind of know what your habits are around that, you can also know how you want to respond in those moments. And again, I love your point. Different athletes are going to do different things. So for some guys, it's taking the deep breath to reset, noticing where you are, and coming into where, you know, coming to a commitment, as Bernie talked about, what do I want to focus on that's actually helpful? For other guys, it might be more controlling of self-talk. But I love that other point you made. I think it's also responding to what the athlete has built in as a structure mentally for themselves for a long time. And us as practitioners stopping trying to force them into, this is how I want you to do it, versus this is what you've enjoyed, found interesting. Let's move from that place if it's been functional from you. I don't need you to be in my box. I'll come play in yours. So 2 things you said that really sparked for me.
And yeah, I think, Billy, we can make your job really easy here for the next hour, just kind of freestyling off each other with Cece and Zach. They make it really easy for me to end then some of their thoughts and philosophies. But I think I'm going to bring Beastie Boys to the soundtrack here, and that would be my contribution to the group. But there's a story that I think came to mind when Zach was talking about how we sort of blend and marry this concept of, do we kind of go with the thoughts and self-talk, or do we kind of manage it and direct it where we want it, and how does that blending look? We had an opportunity to go see Sean McCann at the USOC down in I think it was the US Training Center in Colorado Springs when we were playing the Rockies. We went down there one morning and spent the morning with him and his staff. He's like the senior sports psychologist, or at least was then, for the USOC. And we sat down with him and his group, and that we kind of got onto this topic. And we said, what do you think about doubt and worry and negativity? And Sean McCann said, my philosophy is, I want my athletes to have second guesses. I want them to have doubts. I want them to worry. I want them to kind of go through that negative dialogue with themselves. I just want them to do it at the right time. And I said, well, what's the right time? He goes, well, it's different for everybody, but for us with the Olympics, I want them to wrestle with those hard questions and to wrestle with their inner doubts and worries before they ever get on the plane and fly over to the village. If they haven't come to peace with those doubts and worries, and they haven't confronted them face to face, the last thing I want is for them to have that conversation for the first time ever the night before their big event, or worse, the morning of their big event. I want them to have that wrestling match with themselves long before they get on the plane and fly over to the village. And I thought it was a really cool concept. And then a few years later, I was sitting down and had a chance to learn from a really great UFC fighter. I won't mention the name, but he was talking about some of his big fights in the UFC, and he talked about this weight cutting bath, and that he said that all fighters sit in this hot, messy bath to cut weight before their fight, and it's about 72 hours out from the big event. And he goes, so you're sitting in this bath, and you just let all this negativity flow over you. And you think, what if I get my butt kicked? What if I get embarrassed on pay-per-view? What if millions of people watch me get my ass kicked? This could go really, really badly. I could get really, really hurt. And you just sit in this bath and you let it all just sort of come over you and sit in this mess. And then when you're ready, you pull the plug and the water goes down the drain, and you let all that negative shit go down the drain too. And that was exactly his words. Let all the negative shit go down the drain too. He goes, and then you need to be a little bit more stubborn with how you choose to think up until the point of that fight. And I thought it was kind of a lot like Sean McCann was talking about, where there's a point where you kind of let your mind run and race. And I thought Cece's point about acceptance, you just sort of accept that that's part of being human, is we have these doubts and worries that creep in all the time. And to be okay with that. And maybe there is a point where, okay, I have wrestled with that. I have confronted it. I have accepted and experienced it. Now I'm going to be a little bit more purposeful at this point moving forward through the event, and try to be a little bit more effective, as Cece put it, with how I'm choosing to talk to myself and coach myself through this. But I thought it was a really interesting way of where maybe the two start to get married.
It's really cool to think about the benefits of negative thinking and just kind of getting it out of your system before an event. I'd be curious, like specifically, maybe we'll start with Zach. When you have a player that's maybe up to bat with the game on the line, is there anything you do to kind of prepare them for those moments? Anything that maybe you're saying on the positive thinking side, or just in general, to kind of give them tools when they're in that crunch situation?
Answer. I want to piggyback one thing that Cece and Bernie both shared, in that I think their theme there is the doubts are going to be present for most. Those feelings are very normal, and so normalizing that for everyone. And I had a former colleague that I work with that once said, he's like, I care more about your second thought than I care about the first thought. And that has always kind of stood out to me in terms of I think it's kind of exhausting to operate from a space of every thought has to be positive, every thought even has to be helpful to a degree. Again, those first thoughts in those moments, the reality is they probably aren't always the most helpful. Those are the thoughts that you rarely would say to the people that are closest to you in your lives, yet you have them running in your own mind. So I think that's one thing that I think is is normalizing it a little bit for them, those types of moments, and helping them understand that. And then from that, it's like, okay, it's Cece said it earlier. It's like, what's next? You know, what do you do now with that? What do you either replace it with? What's another maybe mental skill or tool that you can access to kind of center your focus and your attention? I think in kind of to getting to your question, Billy, like, we tend to be, at least from our department standpoint, very kind of biased in a way towards attention and focus. Like, we spend a lot of time talking about how do you train attention. And in the moment, like, that's what it comes down to, is can you focus on the right thing at the right time? And so whatever tools and things can be shared with somebody to kind of help them get to that point, like that's generally the route we go. And sometimes that is, you know, swing thoughts and specific cues that might be a breath. It might be a whole host of different things that I think the more novice sports psych community will probably spend more time on, or like the things you hear a lot of coaches talk about. But I think in that moment, it's having a lot of conversations with players, describing, what do you want to feel in that moment? What do you like? What ultimately matters? And kind of reflecting with them and doing some mirroring of, let's talk a little bit about what soundtrack you want to be listening to in those particular moments, and what you're going to go to. So I would say that's generally where we go. But I think it's also stepping away from the fact that, like, it's got to be always helpful, always positive in a way, because Cece said it earlier, like, some of the negative thoughts are great fuel, you know, and I think that's something too to kind of help players understand is I'm kind of veering, so I hope I'm not going too off track for us. But one thing that I think is important, because I think it's resonated with a lot of players, and we've kind of adapted this from a book called The Gap and the Gain. But there's this concept where, like, when everybody starts their season, you have this ideal as how that season's going to go. That ideal is created by your own goals, your own expectations, maybe the expectations of a coach, a parent, whoever. And then along the way, you make progress towards that goal. What I think erodes a lot of people's confidence is they're constantly living in the gap, that space between the progress that they've had and the distance between that and where they ultimately want to be. And so I think the self-talk in that moment is really important to become aware of, because that's where so many of us kind of operate from a space of never being good enough, which is great fuel to an extent, you know. And I think that's something to kind of help a lot of players understand, that in those moments, I want to make sure that you walk into that moment, bases loaded, bottom nine, whatever that situation is, and you're focused on why you are prepared for that moment and why you should trust. What's the evidence for why you should trust yourself? So anything that I think gets us to that space so you can then direct your attention accordingly, to me is where we tend to go. It just took us in a circle.
Now, Cece, I'd love to hear from you. Maybe some of your experience working with players individually. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Philadelphia is a great place to play for pressure moments. The fan base will make everything feel like a high pressure moment. And I think that was a learning curve for me too. Zach, you got the joy of coming to Philadelphia. It's a fun ballpark. And it made me realize I really had to think about how we prepared players for those moments and drafted players for those moments because there were going to be a lot of them. I would say a couple of things. I hope the first time a player is in a high pressure situation is not their first time in a high pressure situation, and that we are utilizing competition and pressure in practice. And so we're creating experiences long before a big moment for a big moment. Because I think psychologically preparing for the what if and not getting put in that situation is unfair and too bad. Nothing totally mimics it, but the more you can build that into how you work, I think that's great. And to me, it also speaks to the fact that ideally mental performance isn't taken somewhere else and talked in an office with somebody. It's done all the time within practice settings and worked closely alongside your coaching staffs so that the mental game is practiced in practice. I think it's an important marriage, right? It shouldn't be separated and off in an office somewhere. But I would also, I love Zach's point of, how do you perform best? Where is your attention? Where is your focus? What are you doing? We have a tendency as humans to study our bad performances. If I ask a player to tell me about, what it feels like to be in the box when things are going wrong, my God, they've dissected everything. They know everything about it. If I say, okay, you've been hitting 400 these last 2 weeks, tell me about it. They're like, I just feel good. And I'm like, okay, what do you know about it? Like, what's good? And it's almost taboo, but I think it's really interesting. We don't study our successes the way we study our failures. Well, then it's really easy to repeat a failure because you know all about it. It's much harder to repeat something you don't even understand. And so I think there's some interesting points there too of learn who you are when you're great, and learn who you are when you're not great too. But learn who you are when you're great, so that you understand where you want that focus to go, to Zach's point. So you understand what your attention goes to. So you understand what that situation calls for. And then I'll kind of double down on the beginning. Go put yourself in hard situations. So when they come, you kind of have this profile of, I have been under pressure. I have been in high competition. I have been in things when the cards are stacked against me before. This is not a novel situation that I'm not prepared to come up against. Brian Miles posted something the other day that I told him I was going to be a humble thief and steal. But it was an interview, and the guy was like, shouting affirmations in the mirror does nothing. Build this profile of all these experiences, the way you've trained and the things you come back to that build a confidence because you've done all these things, because you've taken all these actions. And I love that. We talk about a certain amount of affirmation or positive self-talk, if it's not based in reality, as junk confidence. You might feel good, but it's not built on anything real. Build the experiences so it's healthy confidence and it's truly built on something real. I think that matters under pressure.
Awesome. And I think almost every episode we're going to close with kind of that topic of how can you bring it into practice, right? Because talking about it on a podcast is one thing. So I guess, Bernie, for you, like if you're in a practice with your athletes, and I guess, how do you address or work on inner voice or any of these topics?
Yeah, I'll double back to a conversation that you and John had with Dan Fisher and myself, with pit volleyball. I think that's something that Dan Fisher is extremely good at doing, is taking stuff from our mental game chalk talk sessions and really kind of applying it in practice. And one of the things we talked a lot about is, and Ceci used the phrase sort of learned optimism earlier in this episode. And I think that's a wonderful place to go with very pragmatic self-talk. Very real self-talk is, it's not about making everything positive and ignoring all the negative, but it's about seeing the negative as short-term, temporary, and changeable, and seeing the positive as something that's more long-term, permanent, and because of something that you caused. And what a powerful way to look at your ups and your downs, your successes and your failures. There's a great interview that both Andre Agassi and Roger Federer gave in 2005, right after the US Open final. Roger won it, Agassi lost it. Here's two great champions with two great mindsets. And Agassi lost, and when asked, what did you think about the match he just played? He goes, you know what? Roger played way too good today. And I love the fact that he emphasized today, meaning, you know what? I want to crack at Roger next weekend. I've got another shot to turn this around next weekend. I failed today. I didn't play well enough today. I wasn't good enough today. And what a powerful way to look at your failures as short-term, temporary, and changeable. And I thought that kind of showed why Agassi became such a great, champion. But then right after that, it goes over to Roger Federer and said, what did you think about the match, Roger? And Roger starts to describe how much he appreciated playing with Agassi. And then he goes, yeah, unfortunately for Andre, it happened that I played my best in the finals as usual. And then the whole place erupted with laughter, and Roger turned red and got embarrassed and realized he said that out loud, and kind of backpedaled back into a place of humility, saying, oh, I don't know how I do it, but I'm very humble that it happens. But what you saw there was a minute of how elite athletes think about their successes. I play my best in the finals as usual. And when I failed today, and tomorrow's a new chance to get back to the road of success. And what a really powerful technique. And as I go back to Dan Fisher in practice, we showed this to the team one afternoon and we dissected it and the team liked it. And I go into the gym the next day and they're doing this blocking drill where Dan has the team, you know, block a coach who's standing on a box. And then after they stuff block him, they have to look the coach in the eye and say, as usual. And suddenly all the players are blocking, looking at eye contact as usual. And if the coach happened to tool one of the hands of the players, the coach would smile, look at the player in the eye and say, as usual. And it just became a sort of fun banter of how they could kind of look at their success. Like, this is what I usually do when I'm at my best. This is the way I am. Like Ceci said, I kind of, when I'm really good, these are the things that I do. These are my signature strengths, and I'm doing them as usual. And we got really good in the gym. Dan got really good at the gym of latching onto this word yet. And I think a lot of athletes in practice, you hear the word can't all the time. You know, I can't pass, I can't block, I can't transition off the net fast enough. And Dan started kind of pulling this idea of Andre Agassi, you know, I failed today, tomorrow's a new chance. He kind of saw it as this time and next time, or can't do it or can't do it yet. And he would say, no, you haven't got your transition footwork down yet. Oh, no, you haven't been able to pass well today yet. And he started kind of shaping the self-talk in practice, making their failures seem temporary, short-term, and something that they can overcome in that practice by adding the word yet to any time you hear them saying, I can't do this. Coach, I can't do this. I can't block. I can't hit. I can't set. No, you can't set yet. You haven't been able to do it this time. Next time you might have a chance at getting it right. And Dan has done a really good job of kind of combining those two things, having fun with the as usual when we do things that play to a player's strength. And then when he sees them struggling, you know what? We haven't figured it out yet. This time you screwed it up. Next time, let's get it right. And really kind of going to that failure is always short-term, temporary, and something that we can change. So I love the fact that Dan did that. And I think that's where a coach can have a lot of powers in sort of being a language shifter or a language changer for players, helping them see their failures as more short-term, temporary, and changeable, and then learning to sort of embrace their signature strengths when they see them playing to those strengths and seeing it in an as usual sort of lens or an as usual sort of perspective.
Awesome. To close, does anybody else have any thoughts on the matter or anything else they want to say or about how to practically apply some of this talk on positive thinking?
Love what Bernie shared there, kind of, oh, sorry, Cece.
Go.
Considering kind of that the present versus past tense, if you will, too, of our self-talk, right? I heard this recently, like there's a difference between saying, oh, I can't land my curveball. You couldn't land your curveball, and just slightly changing kind of and adding a past tense version to it as if it were this event in the past that, again, it's not something that's pervasive that you just can't do as you kind of transition to the future. I think Bernie said it so well there, like the language that we as coaches and staff use. I mean, again, it becomes kind of that inner voice for our players. And so we play a really active role in shaping that and the narrative that they have. So I love that. The one other quick exercise, this isn't so much an in the moment drill that you might integrate in, but I've seen this done. We used to do this, especially if there's any coaches like working with kids, especially. I think this probably is well suited for a youth population, but basically just ask a simple question is like, okay, I want you everybody to line up. And if you're really confident that you can execute and do this thing, whatever that is, I don't care if it's not sports specific, but just if you think you're really good at it, and you think you're the best in the room at it, you're going to line up on this side of the room. And if you're not very good at it, you can line up on this side, and then just watch them, because you're going to see and you're going to hear their self-talk. You know, you're going to start to see how kids start looking around, and you can kind of, I think it creates these really good teachable moments to ask them in those moments, hey, like, what was going through your mind there? I saw you hesitate. I saw that you wanted to go over here, but then you saw other people, and like, where did your mind go? What was going through your head? So I think that lineup exercise was a really kind of simple way, especially I think for youth, where you can kind of get a glimpse into that narrative that kids have on any given skill. And if you can tap into that as a coach, I think it's another way to bring it to awareness for them.
And I'd say as coaches, just watching your athletes and what they do when things are going well, who they are, how they're performing, what they're saying, and who they are when things are not going well. I think the higher and higher level of performance, the more you see strange behaviors, like people get out of normal psychology, I think we have a tendency to want to bring people back. Oh my gosh, this player is wildly negative, Cece. What should we do? Are they performing poorly? No, they just had the best bullpen, but you should have heard him afterward. He was saying horrible things to himself. Okay, but he performed incredibly well. Yes. Okay, well, okay. That may be part of what helps him perform really well. Let's note this and let's pay attention to the next time he's pitching in the next bullpen. And I think to me, there's a piece of pick up on what's working for people. If you have the type of relationship, help them explore it. You know, wow, that was an amazing game for you. Where was your head at? What were you thinking? I think creating this space for the player, the athlete, whoever, to be who they are. They do have a story up till now. So getting involved in their story, figuring out what they need, working from their starting point, I think is a phenomenal place in terms of what your player needs to think. You know, if they can listen, if they have to respond, if the self-talk is positive, negative, effective, if it's just acceptance, they can tell you a lot if you're listening, if you're watching, if you're observing. So I like to tell coaches, like, get involved in your players' world, and coach from their world, not from yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing and tackling a divisive topic. I think it's pretty cool that you guys have all come to some sort of crisis, because it means you're examining your principles and striving to learn and get better. So that's encouraging for me to hear. And I look forward to diving in more on mental skills, mental performance for coaches. Thank you.
Thanks, Philly.